Good morrow, nerds. It is I. Now, you probably have two questions coming into this video. One, where's the darned AI video already? And two, what's all this about vibrators? Well, to answer the first question, the AI video is nearly done. Nearly, but it does need some more time, and I wanted to get something out this month. As for the second, well, you'll have to see. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Call of Cthulhu Quick Start Adventure, The Haunting. I'll be giving you guys a quick overview of Call of Cthulhu, or specifically the simplified rules in the Quick Start guide, as well as going over the Haunting adventure, which I played over the course of 2 sessions with 2 of my regular players. I'll give you guys, some stories of my experiences, some criticisms that I have, and some tips to make sure that your experience isn't nearly as much of a mess as mine. So if you'd like to dive into the world of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, then sit down, buckle up, and prepare to pass basically all of your sanity rolls and leave the whole thing unscathed. Oh, and before I go any further, if you could please subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for notifications, I really would appreciate it. And now for a quick history lesson on Call of Cthulhu. Obviously it takes its name from the title of the classic H.P. Lovecraft short story of the same name. And the game itself was first published in 1981, written by Sandy Peterson, who was also, funnily enough, the designer of the original Doom game, and published by Chaosium, who have been its publisher through all 7 of its editions, making it one of the world's oldest RPGs. And The Haunting, funnily enough, is the oldest scenario for it. It was the first ever game of Call of Cthulhu, according to Peterson himself, and it has been reprinted for pretty much every single edition. Now, the system itself is a derivative of Chaosium's in-house basic role-playing system. It uses D4s, D6s, D8s, D10s, and D20s. No, it does not use D12s because the founder of Chaosium, Greg Stafford, didn't like them. But for the most part, you will use D10s, specifically in a D100 format. You roll one D10 for the units and another D10 for the 10s. There's more complexity to that, more on that later. You will then compare that to usually a stat or skill value, which will be rated from usually 1 to 99. And if you roll equal or under, you succeed. And if you roll over, then you fail. There is some nuance here. For starters, for particularly difficult tasks, you may have to roll equal or under half of your stat or skill, or even equal or under a fifth. These are hard and extreme successes respectively. And in situations like combat, they can provide extra benefits, such as impaling strikes, which, more on those later. There is another piece of complexity here, which is bonus and penalty dice. If you have a particular, advantage or disadvantage, to making a roll, such as trying to spot something in a dimly lit room, you take a penalty die. You roll an extra D10 tens die and use the worst tens die. Likewise, if you have an advantage, say for example you're getting help from another investigator, then you instead, when you roll that extra tens die, you take the better tens die. Now, these mechanics work really well for in-person play with physical dice, which is what Call of Cthulhu was designed for. The 7th edition was published in 2014, and so although virtual tabletops did exist, they weren't in wide use. Now, I bring all this up because of a very important point, and that is that when you're using a digital dice roller, bonus and penalty dice are a pain in the behind. The way I did it with my players is I had them roll the D100 for the basic percentile roll, and then roll a D10. Which is going to be the replacement tens die. Now that got a bit confusing and a bit clunky. It often required multiple commands in the Discord dice roller that we were using. And so yeah, I'm not a huge fan of how it's laid out. Like I said, for in-person play, there are no problems. This will work fine. For online play, unless you've got some integrations built in to simplify things, I have no idea how well the Call of Cthulhu character sheet in Roll20 works, for instance. Perhaps it can fix these things. But I would say just, roll additional D100s. Oh, you had a bonus die? Roll 2 D100, take the lowest. You had 2 bonus dice, which is the maximum. Well, okay then, roll 3 D100, take the lowest. That is much, much simpler. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you will either be rolling usually against your full stat or skill, half stat or skill, or fifth stat or skill. Now what this means is that oftentimes you'll be rolling against very low percentage values, routinely under 50%. And so what that means is you are going to fail a lot. Each stat is generally rated from either 15 to 90 or 40 to 90, depending on the stat. So strength, dexterity, constitution, appearance, and power are all generated on 3d6 times 5 and are rated from 15 to 90, while size, intelligence, and education, yes, size is a stat in this game, those are all rolled on 2d6 plus 6 times the whole thing by 5, and so those are rated from 40 to 90. Skills have a base value. So for your native language, that'll just be your education stat, is the base value for that skill. For first aid, it's 30%. For piloting a plane, it's 1%. And for Cthulhu Mythos, it is 0. So, if you fail because you have only 30% first aid, the base for that skill, well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is you get a reroll. All you have to do is describe the extra effort that you are going to make that reroll happen. The extra time, the fact that you are, tearing up your clothes to make a tourniquet, anything that you could do to put some extra oomph into it. If you describe that, you get a reroll. The bad news is that if the reroll fails, it's effectively a crit fail. So congratulations, you no longer have clean clothes. I used this one multiple times with first aid, which we're going to get to this. My players had a lot of horrible rolls in this game, and first aid, as I said, has a base value of 30%. Now, depending on your character's occupation, you may have a higher first aid, but the 4 pre-generated characters that come with this adventure pretty much all have 30% first aid. Now, with pushing, a double 30% chance becomes a 51% chance once you've done all the maths. Theoretically, eventually, they should have been able to pass a roll. Should have been. I swear to God, they failed every single time. And that is part of why this adventure ended up being so deadly, beyond the magic vibrators. Again, hold your horses, we're getting to them. Personally, what I found with the core mechanics is that they are fine. The percentile system is very simple, it works. The bonus and penalty dice kind of underperformed, but they weren't really intended for the way we were doing things. And the pushed rolls, I had some trouble with them. I couldn't always figure out, interesting things to do with the consequences, which ended up, biting me in the behind a few times. But overall, the core mechanics are decent. Now, as we get into combat, this is where things get interesting. Call of Cthulhu, first off, uses fixed initiative. You go on your dexterity score. If you have 55 dexterity, you act on 55. If you have 50 dexterity, you act on 50. Thus, someone with 55 dex will always act before someone with only 50. The exception is guns and a few spells where you act on dex plus 50. So suddenly, if that 50 dex character has a gun, they can go before the 55 dex character as long as the first thing they do on that turn is to pull the trigger. Now personally, I found that fixed initiative was very quick, very slick, but it was lacking something. I do genuinely like initiative rolls. Yes, they're slow, yes, they're paperworky, but they add a bit of, anticipation and pacing in front of a combat. There's a moment to, build the tension up as everybody's rolling, as you're hoping and praying to be acting first. That just isn't there. There's a certain fatalism to fixed initiative that I'm not a huge fan of. As for combat itself, melee attacks are based off opposed rolls, and ranged attacks are based off fixed rolls with difficulties going up based on how far away you're shooting. Normal difficulty at base range, hard difficulty, so half skill, at double range, and extreme difficulty, or 1/5 skill, at quadruple range. Nice and simple. There's some other stuff in the full rulebook, which I did have a copy of and did reference for some things. You can say fire a handgun 3 times with a penalty die for every bullet, instead of just firing it once in a round, which is definitely a mistake if you don't have a high handgun skill, as one of the players learned, but that is another matter. And then we come to hit points. Now, hit points are very simple. There are no levels in Call of Cthulhu, so your hit points are based on a mathematical formula based off 2 of your stats. And their stats are Constitution, which has an average of 52.5, and Size, which has an average of 65. The average character will have an average sum of 117.5, which they will divide by 10 and round down to get their hit points. So an average character will have an 11. There are 4 pre-generated characters in the Haunting, and all of them pretty much have either 10 HP or 12 HP. So yeah, characters in Call of Cthulhu are squishy. There is no armor class. There is armor described in the full rules, not in the quick start rules, but even then, most investigators won't have it. And when you take into account further that, say, a 38 revolver does 1d10 damage, things get rough. Ridiculously rough. If you take half your HP in a single hit, you take something called a major wound, which forces you to make a constitution roll to avoid unconsciousness and also makes healing much slower. Instead of 1 HP per day automatically, you get 1d3 per week of bed rest, but only if you pass a constitution roll, which, more on that later. So yeah, major wounds, not fun, and for most investigators, it will take only 5 or 6 points of damage to inflict one. Side note, if you take your full HP in a single hit, you are bye-bye. That's it. Time for a new character. I probably wouldn't mind how low HP is if damage was also low, but damage is pretty high and HP is low, and as we will see, that is going to get ridiculous. I should not have done so much damage with nothing but 10-foot drops. And then, of course, there is one final important mechanic to mention in Call of Cthulhu, and that is sanity. The stories of H.P. Lovecraft are all about characters who encounter strange and unknowable horrors who are progressively driven more and more insane as they lose track of reality. They develop phobias and manias, they start seeing strange delusions, they completely lose the plot, and everything goes to hell for them. And that is what I was hoping for from Call of Cthulhu. Now, the way the mechanics work, you have a sanity stat. This start's equal to your POW score. So if you have 55 POW, you start the game with 55 sanity. But if you already start that way, sanity will change. Whenever you confront some horror, mundane or mystical, you make a sanity roll. You roll 1d100 equal or under your sanity. If you succeed, you take either no sanity loss or very little sanity loss. If you fail, you take a whole bunch of it. If you lose any points of sanity at all, the Keeper, which is what Call of Cthulhu calls the Game Master, gets to take control of your character for a brief moment and do something fun with them. If you lose 5 or more sanity in a single incident, then you have to make an intelligence check. If you succeed, yes, succeed, you go temporarily insane. And what that means is that for the next 1d10 rounds, you are doing some crazy crap that comes from a 1d10 table in the Haunting Adventure. Now, there are things like permanent insanity and indefinite insanity that are described in the full rulebook, but for now this is all you need. Now, I have my quibbles with sanity, but honestly I'm going to get to those at the end, because let's face it, you all came here to hear how this went and to learn what the hell I was going on about with the vibrators. Okay, now before we get into the adventure itself, warning here, I'm going to be spoiling it all the way through to the end of this video, so if you're a player, then please stop now. That said, you can send your GM this way, and hopefully they will run this adventure for you. If you're a GM though, then please stick around as we dive into the legend of Walter Corbett and the Haunting. So, let's set the scene. It's 1920s Boston. And we have 2 players and 3 characters. There was a backup character. We had a private investigator, an author/researcher, to quote the character sheet, and a graduate student. The author/researcher was the backup character. And just while I'm on these characters, they're fine, they've got a lot of useful skills for the adventure, but of the 4, only 2 have weapons. That seems a bit rough to me. The private investigator has a .38 revolver, and the author/researcher has a switchblade. That's it. You're going in pretty lightly armed into this adventure, so do be warned. Now, the investigators are all brought together by one Mr. Knott, who has a haunted house that he just can't rent. Goddamn property market, eh? So, he offers the investigators $20 a day, that's $20 total, not per person, to figure out what's going on, give the place a clean bill of health, so that he can finally rent it out again. Now, the way this will then go is that the players have a number of leads that they can investigate regarding the house, its history, and the previous tenants. I dare say, this section is great. This is a really well done investigation, and I know it's well done because my players went through it backwards, and it still made sense. You can kind of tell, reading through the adventure, that each of the locations and the clues they have are kind of meant to be found in the order that they appear in the adventure. My players found them in basically a random order, as they kind of jutted back and forth between random places. The locations that there are things like the Boston Globe, the Hall of Records, the police station, the Temple of a Weird Cult, more on them later, and a couple of other places. I also added in the house of a Catholic priest because my players weren't looking for one, although he was never particularly helpful. So yeah, as I said, very well done. There are handouts provided in the back of the adventure. They aren't particularly fancy in their layout, but they get the job done, and if you don't like them, then there are plenty of alternatives online, so no problem there. Now, I particularly want to highlight the Chapel of Contemplation. Once the players have been through the Hall of Records and they've learned about the history of this Walter Corbett, once they've been through the Boston Globe and learned some things about previous incidents at the house, and once they've visited, places like the Roxbury Sanatorium and spoken to the previous tenants, they will eventually come to the Chapel of Contemplation. It's a stone, kind of ruined building with a weird bit of eye graffiti that is on the wall for some reason. The module doesn't explain it. Now, when they come in, they can explore around, but what they find initially is of little use, except for some weak floorboards. Now, if they fail first a luck roll and then a jump roll, they fall in and take 1d6 damage, because, like D&D, Call of Cthulhu does falling damage as 1d6 per 10 feet, which sounds fine, but remember those major wound rules. A 5 or a 6 on that d6 is enough to major wound a 10 HP player character. And that's what happened. The graduate student fell through. I think he took 1d8 damage due to a failed pushed roll, because I worsened it due to the failed pushing. And so he took a d8, and I rolled a 5. And now all of a sudden, he had a major wound. This was the first instance of damage in the game from something that, if it happened to your eye, would hurt, would leave a nasty graze, but that we could probably walk off. But for him, he got a massive scar on his face. As compensation, he did get a cool Mythos tome. When I say cool, it's not got a ton of stuff in there. The description is very vague, but yeah, it does the job. So, having gathered all of their clues, they went to the house of the mysterious Walter Corbett. This is where everything fell apart. Now, Walter Corbett has been mentioned a few times, and they know that he exists. They know that he was buried in his basement, and they know that he had something to do with the Chapel of Contemplation. They also know that he was kind of a weirdo. What they don't know, that I'm telling you guys, is that he is an undead monster living in his basement, just vibing and living his best life. He doesn't really hurt anyone unless they come to live in his house, in which case he absolutely does hurt them. See those poor people from the Roxbury Sanatorium. Now, when they come in, Corbett will use his magical powers as a mythos sorcerer, an undead mythos sorcerer at that, to entice them upstairs into his old bedroom. Now, this was the first really great horror moment of this adventure. As one of the players went into his room to investigate, the door clicked shut and stayed shut. Then blood began appearing from the ceiling. The player was spooked, went for the door, but couldn't open it. Neither could the backup character who was standing on the other side. As he stood on the ground, blood began to pool beneath his feet. Nervous and unsure what the hell was going on, he took a step towards the only exit he could see, the window. But before he could make any graceful descent, that choice was taken away from him, as the bare wooden bed frame that just sat there quietly in the corner leapt up, sprang to life, and smashed into him, driving him through the window, dropping him 10 feet onto broken glass, and causing a major wound. Again, a major wound from a 10-foot drop. An incredible moment, a scary, tense, dread-filled moment. And to be fair, there was broken glass as well, so it was 1d6 plus 2 damage, but still, at this point, both player characters have had major wounds. And this one was bad enough to put the private investigator, who had 12 HP, not 10 HP, on something like 1 health. He was not doing well. So, he was sent off in an ambulance to recover, and the graduate student and the author went on to continue with things, with the private investigator player assuming the author as the character. And so, having experienced the ground floor, found Corbett's diary, which includes a bunch of fun things, including the Summon Bind Dimensional Shambler spell, which my players were very disappointed that they wouldn't get to use, but honestly, it's probably for the best. They don't know how it works, and again, that's for the best. I read through the description. It's a pain in the ass. I don't know why it's there. It's a cool Easter egg, but it just slowed things down. They go through the ground floor, the upper floor, and all that's left for them is the basement. At this point, they're a bit nervous. They've seen some really weird stuff. Blood from the ceiling, reflections of glowing eyes in a stagnant pool in the bathtub. Someone has been thrown out of a window by a bed frame. They are spooked. And so when they come to the basement door and see that it not only has a lock, but multiple bolts, they almost don't want to go in. Put a pin in that, because them not wanting to go in is going to become a theme. But with some light cajoling, they step down and come to some rotting stairs, which these require either a dex or a climb roll, which one player succeeded and the other failed. Then, when the one who succeeded tried to help the one who failed, they failed the pushed roll and both of them fell. Now at this point, the module asked me to give them each 1d6 damage, but I was sick of major wounds from bloody falling damage, so I softened up and made it a 1d4. Don't tell my players I did that. I know they'll watch this video, I know they'll find out, but please don't tell them anyway. It's just courteous. So, they land in the basement. It's, stone and wooden walls, bunch of junk on the floor, and among that junk they find a knife. And they're, fiddling around with it, having a good time, and then it springs to life. Flies up into the air and starts attacking to them. Remember I promised the vibrator? This is the vibrator. I don't know why it's the vibrator, my players named it the vibrator, and honestly, that is a thing unto itself. My players and I have a very casual, jokey player atmosphere, and for things like D&D or Cyberpunk, that works pretty well. It keeps things light, keeps things fun, and makes sure that in the dark moments there is always a little bit of light. But some people find that in horror games, humour doesn't really work. And I think I might agree. Yes, it's the right shape. Yes, it was thrusting at them. And yes, it was, maybe vibrating a little. But the very kind of sexual humour, I do feel kind of cheap in the moment. I don't like, crimping the atmosphere at the table. Believe it or not, my players don't, but it's true. And so I'm not sure if I did the right thing by allowing this joke to stand. I'll let you guys in the comments section judge me at your discretion. But yeah, they were chased around the basement by a vibrator, and the vibrator's first attack was an impaling strike. Now, I mentioned impaling strikes earlier. If you get an extreme success on your attack, then you do max damage plus damage. And they also specify in the rules max damage bonus plus damage bonus, but you and I can treat damage and damage bonus as the same thing. It's not that big a deal. Now, the knife per the rules does 1d4 plus 2 damage, which means for an impale, it does 6 plus 1d4 plus 2, or 1d4 plus 8, or 9 to 12 damage. That is an automatic major wound and has a very good chance of just outright killing a character. Because remember, max HP, in a single hit, you die. Again, I took mercy. I made that 1d4 plus 1. And thank God I did, because if I hadn't, the backup character would have instantly died. As it was, he was left with just 2 HP. So yeah, players, I know you guys think that I'm a sadistic asshole. I can have mercy. And if you keep pretending that I don't, that mercy, it might have to go away. They do seize a hold of the object, and Corbett stops animating it because I want to freak them out with it later. But rather than doing what the module expects them to do and, breaking down the wooden walls in the basement and finding Corbett's lair, they don't. They just walk off with the knife because they're all very, very close to death and they want time to heal. And I didn't really feel like pushing them because, well, it kind of made sense. Now, I probably shouldn't have allowed them as long to heal as I did. I ended up giving them 2 weeks to give them a chance to deal with those major wounds. The backup character, however, failed both of his con rolls and actually got a nat 100 on the second, which in the full rules is a fumble. So I actually knocked an HP off him just for good measure. But yeah, luckily, by this time, the private investigator had recovered, took back his pistol, and got back into the fray. So everything was fine, but it did kill the pacing. Now, one thing the module suggests is that if the players abandon ship and leave the house, Mr. Knott goes to stay the night there, and Corbett murders him with the knife. Problem is, the players had the knife, and I didn't think that Mr. Knott would really go down into the basement, smash up the walls, into Corbett's lair, and fight him there and die, which is the only really way I could conceive of Corbett killing him with the rules as presented. Yeah, he could summon a dimensional shambler, but do I really want to do that for just killing an NPC? Come on, come on. Anyway, I did not do that. I did not have this thing happen. And so yeah, I allowed the pacing to die. That was my mistake. But on the 20th day of the adventure, after 14 continuous days of bed rest, the players went back in through the wooden walls, and they found the burial of one Walter Corbett. They came up to some astrological charts, found the current day marked on it, and heard a creepy voice from behind them, as the corpse of Walter Corbett stood up, mocked them, and went full attack. The knife animated again, and we got into one hell of a final fight, as one player duked it out in melee with Corbett, wasting a whole lot of ammo, and the other just kept trying to grab the knife, only to lose it again on Corbett's turn. This was a bit of a rollerpalooza, back and forth, but eventually the knife grappling player grappled the knife, kept hold of the knife, and stabbed Corbett with the knife. And at that point, the adventure was over. Now, some notes on Corbett. A lot of his minor manifestations don't incur sanity loss and don't incur any magic point cost for him. Now, I disagree with both of these. Seeing blood from the ceiling should be like a 1d2 or 1d4 sanity loss. Something like that, to give it some kick, and should probably cost a magic point for him. Magic points are based off 1/5 POW, and you refresh 1 per hour. I should have said this earlier, but I'm not using a script, so my mistake. Which means that there are actually very few places to lose sanity. I mentioned that we would talk about sanity, and here's the thing. There are, in the entire adventure, 2 situations where you have 1d4 sanity loss, so 1 sanity loss on a success and 1d4 on a fail. Those are the bed frame and the animating knife. And there are, I think, some places where you lose 1d4 sanity from reading both Corbett's journal and the Mythos tome in the chapel. And then there is the encounter with Corbett, which is 1d8 sanity loss. Now, because there is so little sanity loss earlier in the adventure, my players were still on nearly full sanity, and both of them passed their sanity checks, which means that both of them saw Corbett and only lost 1 sanity. Now, even if one of them had failed, you roll a 1d8, and there's a 50% chance on a 1d8 that you get a 5 or more. If that happens, congratulations! You have to make an intelligence check. But that didn't happen. Like I said, there's only 1 moment for insanity in the entire adventure, and my players rolled their way past it, and would reasonably have been expected to pass through it. Because why wouldn't they? They have decent power stats, and they've not lost much sanity. What the hell was supposed to happen? So yeah, I am salty that the moment of insanity never came to pass. In fact, at the end of the adventure, you get 1d6 sanity back. Now, one character only lost 5 sanity, and then rolled a 6. He ended the adventure saner than he started it. At that point, he should just spam haunted houses. He'd be a mental health junkie, just, achieving enlightenment. It'd be amazing. Well, apart from the whole, sanity loss from Mythos creatures, gives you Mythos skill, which lowers max sanity, but you get my point. Now, to be fair, in a long-form campaign, the fact that you get sanity back does extend the longevity of your character, and the fact that sanity loss can be so sparse does give the opportunity for a slow, creeping descent into madness. But I wasn't doing a long-form campaign. I was doing a one-shot that dragged out into 2 sessions. I wanted to see insanity, I wanted madness, I wanted excitement, and I didn't get it, and I was disappointed. Naturally, anyone would be in this situation. But alas, that is how it was. So yeah, I do feel that there should have been more opportunities to lose sanity, and more opportunities to lose at least a d6 or a d4 plus 1 of sanity, because then you have more chances to roll on that 1d10 Bound of Madness table. So yeah, that was the adventure. I think final thoughts, as I've kind of made clear, with Call of Cthulhu, the fundamentals of the system are fine. My 2 objections are that sanity loss is too low and damage is too high. There is realism, and then there is brutalism. Personally, I feel that in terms of damage, Call of Cthulhu is too brutalist. Characters are way more fragile than even a human being in real life would be. Like I said, you or I can survive a 10-foot drop. It's fine, we'll be fine. Most people don't break their legs from it. Maybe they do, but it shouldn't be a 1 in 3 chance. As for sanity, I did want something more dramatic. I did want something more exciting. And maybe in a different adventure with more sanity loss or in a long-form campaign, that would work better. I am open-minded to that possibility. Those are my two critiques of the system. As for the adventure, I would say, it's pretty solid overall. The investigation was great. There was a slowly mounting sense of tension, and one player commented after the first session, there was a good sense of pacing to the rolls. Looking back through the Discord, you could see that all of the rolls were spaced, a roughly even number of minutes apart, even though my players had some atrocious die rolls in places and had to be bailed out by the backup character, which nobody wants but was necessary in places. They got through it. Everybody survived. It was a dramatic event, and yeah. Like I said, I think the haunted house itself has some issues. The biggest issue I think was, I don't know if it was the house or just the players. My players oftentimes weren't scared of the house, they were apprehensive. There's a distinction. Fear is where you experience negative emotion regarding an anticipated future event and start to act nervous and, go a little loopy. Apprehension is where you experience negative emotion regarding an anticipated future event, and so you just sit there doing nothing because you're too scared to do anything. And that was, I think, the biggest problem I had with my players. They were too scared to go upstairs. They were too scared to go downstairs. They were too scared to stay downstairs. And that kind of dragged things out and made things difficult. I don't know if that's a module issue. I don't know if that's a player issue. I don't want to blame my players. That feels unfair. But yeah, that's kind of how it was. Overall then, my view of Call of Cthulhu is that it's a decent system, but that I haven't quite cracked it. I would be open to trying it again, probably this time as a player under an experienced game master, or keeper. I will keep calling it game master just out of habit. But yeah, I would say, go ahead, try it. Do keep some things in mind. Do be very wary of falling damage, and do be wary of that knife, because, oh god, even doing it with 1d4 plus 1 damage, an impale would still be 7 to 10 damage, and that's enough to cause trouble. I would say, yeah, 1d4 plus 1 is good damage for the magic dagger. You may want to add some sanity loss in places, remove some damage loss in places, just to keep things flowing and to keep the players not feeling so fragile that they can't engage with the adventure. Like I said, that is my big criticism. But you don't just have to take it from me. One of my players is actually a YouTuber himself. He calls himself Darkly Yours. He makes videos all about magic, so maybe you can ask him to summon or bind a dimensional shambler. And now he has very generously agreed to give us a couple of minutes of his opinion on the haunting.
Hi, this is Noah, Darkly Yours, talking about my experience playing Call of Cthulhu with the Sasho Coates. Firstly, I would like to say it was a great game experience, a great game environment. The pace of the game moved very well, and the story was very involving. I would like to comment on two aspects of the gameplay that I think would be useful to most people who plan on running a Call of Cthulhu campaign, whether a one-shot or a longer form campaign. In my experience, my character got taken out by going out a window, and he was supposed to be one of the tankier characters. So my recommendation is to, when running a longer or shorter form campaign, adjust the insanity rules so that your characters can experience the insanity rules, which is a huge part of the Call of Cthulhu gameplay. So just adjust it appropriately to the length of your campaign, whether it's a one-shot or a longer form, so that that comes into play but isn't prohibitive necessarily. And secondly, just your character's survivability. The campaign that I was wanting to run, all of the players in my group would have very likely have died on the first roll. They had about a 20% chance of survival. So you may want to be a little bit more lenient than that, just so you can actually get to the content of the game. So you don't want your players to be invincible like they can become in other tabletop RPGs, but you also don't want them to die from paper cuts and Charlie horses. So that's my advice and my experience with Call of Cthulhu. I hope you guys enjoy and are able to play for yourselves and come up with your own ideas.
So yeah, thank you very much to him for giving us a moment of his time. You can subscribe to his channel, I've linked it below. Fortunately, I am now ahead of him in both subscribers and views, so I get to do that without any sense of insecurity. But yeah, please do support him. He's a good friend of mine. You know, he's been a player of mine for over a year now. So please do show him some love. You know, he does tarot readings, spell thingies. You know, it's a good time. But, as with my D&D recap video, you know, we still have that out of context channel and we still had some funny things that appeared in out of context. So, I think we have a dramatic reading in order. Now, I can't read you the first thing that we recorded from these sessions, because it just isn't appropriate for YouTube. But the second thing most certainly is. I don't know why I keep threatening people. I'm basically a wizard at this point. I got you an ambulance, you bitch. I'll pay them extra to kill you. I didn't even know we were making sense. It's like giant solid wood. Woo, I'm a big boy. Oh my god, it's massive! I'd sell you for a pizza. I wish I was a loser. We did everything backwards, and then I fell out of a window. We did it. Damn you, gravity, our one true weakness. It's a vibrator! Why did you make the vibrator angry? Don't you wish you got a Corsica from a flying dildo? I have, like, a lot of candy in my van. Grab this vibrator like you've never grabbed it before. I got the vibrator! And with that, exclamation, I think we'll draw things to a wrap here. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and a comment and share it with your friends. And if you'd like more videos like these, then please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. The next video will be the ChatGPT video, I promise, I promise, I promise. It's nearly done, and it should be out around the middle of September. Maybe even earlier if I get my act together. You know, these things take time, it's going to be 2 hours long, it will be amazing, but I want to do it properly. So yeah, thank you all for bearing with me. And so, once more, thank you all very much for watching, and until I see you next, farewell.